Ambassador Tai Yang stood in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, watching the delegates argue like children fighting over toys. He had been standing there for 3 hours now, waiting for his turn to speak. His legs ached, but he kept his face calm and neutral. This was his job, after all. He represented Earth and all of humanity in this massive room filled with aliens from 100 different worlds. The chamber was beautiful, he had to admit. The walls were made of crystal that changed colors with the light. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed up there. Seats were arranged in circles, each one designed for a different species. Some delegates sat on chairs, others floated in tanks of liquid, and some hung from the ceiling on special platforms. Today, they were arguing about the border war again. The Vrelian Empire and the Kothran Federation had been fighting over 3 star systems for the past 2 years. Hundreds of ships had been destroyed, thousands of soldiers had died, and now both sides wanted the Council to send peacekeepers. They wanted humans to go and stop the fighting. This was the 15th time in 12 months that the Council had demanded human military forces. 15 times. Taeyang kept count in a small notebook he carried everywhere. The Vrelian Chancellor, a tall being with purple skin and too many arms, was speaking now. His voice boomed through the chamber. The Kothran Federation has violated our territorial claims. They refuse to see reason. We need the human fleet to enforce the Council's decision. A Kothran delegate stood up, his scales rattling with anger. Lies, the Vrelians are the aggressors. They want to steal our colonies. Send the humans to protect us. Taeyang closed his eyes briefly. Both sides were lying, of course. He had read the reports. The truth was that both empires wanted those star systems because they were rich in rare minerals. Neither side cared about the colonists who actually lived there. Those poor people just wanted to be left alone. Finally, the council speaker called his name. Ambassador Taeyang of Earth, you may address the council. He walked slowly to the center platform. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. Some delegates looked impatient. Others looked annoyed. A few looked openly hostile. Taeyang had learned to read alien expressions over his 20 years of service. None of them looked respectful. He placed his data tablet on the podium and opened the file he had prepared. It contained everything: casualty reports, economic impact studies, proposals for peaceful negotiation, warnings about civilian populations caught in the crossfire. He had spent 3 weeks preparing this speech, then he paused. His finger hovered over the screen. How many times had he given speeches like this? How many times had he presented careful plans only to be interrupted and dismissed? How many human lives had been spent fixing problems that these aliens created and refused to solve themselves? Taeyang thought about Captain Hyun-woo, who commanded the human peacekeeping fleet. Hyun-woo was a good man, a father of 3. He had spent the last 5 years jumping from one crisis to another, never sleeping more than 4 hours a night. His crew was exhausted. They had lost 47 ships in the past year alone, and the Council had sent exactly 0 messages of condolence. He thought about Dr. Ji-won, who ran the medical response teams. She had saved millions of alien lives, working herself to exhaustion during every plague outbreak and natural disaster. Last month, a Palaxian official had called her work adequate and complained that humans took too long to arrive at emergencies. He thought about the engineers, the teachers, the farmers, the diplomats. Thousands of humans, scattered across the galaxy, doing the hard work that nobody else wanted to do. Building things, fixing things, keeping the peace. And for what? So that these delegates could mock them during every council session? The Vrelian Chancellor made an impatient sound. Ambassador, we are waiting. Will Earth provide military support or not? Taeyang looked at him. Then he looked at the Kothran delegate. Then he looked around the entire chamber, meeting as many eyes as he could. He closed his data tablet with a soft click. The sound echoed in the suddenly quiet chamber. Then Taeyang turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps were the only sound. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They all just watched him walk away. At the door, he stopped and looked back one final time. Still, he said nothing. Then he left. The chamber erupted in confusion. Delegates shouted questions. The council speaker demanded order. But Taeyang was already gone, walking down the long corridor toward the human embassy section. He pulled out his personal communicator and sent a single message. It was encrypted with the highest security protocols. The message had only 2 words: protocol departure. Across the galaxy, every human in a position of authority received that message within minutes. They all knew what it meant. They had discussed this possibility for years, always in private, always in secret. None of them had truly believed it would happen. But now it had. Captain Hyunwoo received the message while his ship was patrolling the neutral zone between two warring species. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood. Then he ordered his fleet to stand down and set course for Earth. Dr. Jiwon received it while she was performing surgery on a Vrelian child who had been injured in a mining accident. She finished the surgery, made sure the child was stable, and then sent instructions to her medical teams. Pack everything, document all procedures, transfer care to local staff, and go home. Engineer Young-soo received it while he was fixing a critical malfunction in the Nexus Gate hyperspace network. He was the supervisor for the entire system, responsible for keeping the galaxy's trade routes functional. He spent the next 6 hours writing detailed manuals and instructions, explaining everything that needed to be done to keep the gates running. He left the manuals in the control center, clearly labeled and organized. Then he and his team boarded a transport and left. All across the galaxy, humans began to withdraw. They left in perfect order. They documented everything. They transferred their responsibilities to whoever would accept them. They trained local staff as much as possible in the limited time they had, but they did not explain why they were leaving. When aliens asked questions, humans simply said they had been recalled to Earth. When pressed for details, they smiled politely and said nothing more. Within 1 week, 50% of human personnel had returned home. Within 2 weeks, 75%. Within 1 month, the last humans were packing their belongings and saying quiet goodbyes to the few alien friends they had made. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions. They sent messages to Earth demanding explanations. Every message went unanswered. Not blocked, not rejected, just ignored. Some council members laughed. The humans are throwing a tantrum, the Vrelian Chancellor said. They will come back when they realize we are serious. Others were worried. Maybe we should try to talk to them, suggested a Palaxian trade minister. But the majority voted to wait. Humans were useful, yes, but they were not essential. The galaxy had existed for millions of years before humans arrived. It would continue just fine without them. They were wrong, of course, but they would not understand that for many months to come. On Earth, Taeyang stood in his garden and looked up at the stars. He felt tired, but also strangely peaceful. For the first time in 20 years, he would sleep in his own bed for more than a few days. For the first time in 20 years, he would not have to smile politely while aliens insulted his people. He wondered if the council would ever understand. Probably not. But that was their problem now, not his. 3 months had passed since the humans left. And engineer Young-soo was harvesting vegetables in his family's garden when he saw the news broadcast. His hands were dirty from the soil and the sun was warm on his back. Earth felt good after so many years in space stations with recycled air. The news showed the Nexus Gate station where he used to work. The reporter was talking fast, her voice worried. Officials report another malfunction in the hyperspace network today. This is the 5th incident this week. Trade ships are experiencing delays of up to 3 days. The Galactic Commerce Authority says they are working to resolve the issues. Young-soo pulled a carrot from the ground and brushed off the dirt. He was not surprised. He had known this would happen. He had written everything down before he left. Explained every system, every backup protocol, every maintenance schedule. The manuals were sitting right there in the control center, but he knew nobody had read them. The problem was simple. The Nexus gates needed constant small adjustments. Space was not static. Gravity fields shifted. Stars moved. Every gate had to be recalibrated every 3 days to maintain perfect alignment. If you skipped even one calibration, the gates would still work, but they would be off by tiny fractions of a degree. Those tiny errors would add up over time. Young-soo had tried to explain this to his alien co-workers many times. They always nodded and said they understood, but he could tell they thought he was being too careful. Humans worry too much, they used to say. The gates have been working for centuries. Yes, Young-soo thought as he watched the news. The gates had been working for centuries, and for the last 127 years, humans had been maintaining them. Across the galaxy, on a medical station orbiting the Kothran homeworld, doctors were struggling with a plague outbreak. The disease had started small, just a few cases in a coastal city. but now it had spread to 6 continents and infected over 40 million people. Dr. Haywan watched the news from her apartment on Earth and felt her stomach twist with worry. She remembered that plague. She had studied it during her training. It was a respiratory virus that mutated quickly and spread through touch, but it was also easy to contain if you acted fast. The key was genetic tracing. You had to identify every single person who had been exposed and quarantine them immediately. Then you had to synthesize a vaccine using the local population's genetic markers. The whole process took about 72 hours if you had the right equipment and training. Haywan had contained 3 outbreaks of this exact disease during her career. Each time, fewer than 1,000 people had died. It was tragic, but it could have been so much worse. Now, without human epidemiologists, the Kothran health officials were trying to use standard quarantine procedures. They were moving too slowly. The virus was mutating faster than they could track it. Haywan estimated that at least 10 million people would die before they got it under control. She had spent 15 years training alien doctors in human medical techniques. Some of them had learned well, but most of them had thought human methods were too complicated, too expensive, too cautious. Now those doctors were overwhelmed and desperate. Her communicator buzzed. It was a message from a Kothran doctor she had trained, begging for help. Haywan stared at the message for a long time. Then she deleted it. She had been ordered not to respond to any requests from the council or its members. The order came from Earth's government, and it was absolute. She went to her kitchen and made tea, trying not to think about the people dying while she sat safely at home. In the council chambers, Councillor Vrextal was reviewing reports and becoming increasingly worried. He was Vrelian, and like most of his species, he was proud and confident. But he was also smart enough to see patterns. The Nexus Gate problems were not improving. If anything, they were getting worse. Yesterday, a cargo ship had emerged from hyperspace 3 light-years off course. The crew had been terrified. If they had been any further off, they might have ended up in the middle of a star. The Kothran plague was spiraling out of control. The death toll had reached 15 million and was climbing every day. And those were just the obvious problems. Vrextal had started digging deeper, looking at smaller issues that nobody else seemed to notice. Agricultural yields were dropping on 73 colonies. The automated farming systems that humans had installed were breaking down. Local farmers did not know how to fix them. Crime rates were rising in sectors that used to be patrolled by human security forces. The local police did not have the training or equipment to handle interspecies conflicts. Refugee camps were running out of supplies. Humans had been managing the logistics for those camps, making sure food and medicine arrived on time. Now shipments were delayed or lost. Vrextal pulled up the council's personnel records. He wanted to see exactly how many humans had been working in different sectors. What he found shocked him. Humans had been handling 73% of all emergency medical responses, 61% of infrastructure maintenance, 82% of peacekeeping operations, 90% of refugee support services. How had he never noticed this before? How had nobody noticed? He brought his findings to the next council session. The other delegates listened with varying degrees of concern. "This is temporary," the Vrelian chancellor said. "We simply need to hire more workers to replace the humans." "Replace them with whom?" Vrextal asked. "Most species do not want these jobs. The work is hard, dangerous, and often thankless. Humans were willing to do it." "Who else will?" The Palaxian trade minister spoke up. "Perhaps we should send a delegation to Earth, open negotiations." "Ask them to return." The chamber erupted in argument. Some delegates agreed. Others refused, saying it would make the council look weak. The Vrelian chancellor was the loudest voice against negotiation. "We will not beg," he declared. The humans walked away from their responsibilities. Let them see what happens when they abandon the galaxy. They will come back on their own when they realize how much they need us. Vrextal wanted to point out that it seemed to be the galaxy that needed humans, not the other way around. But he kept quiet. He was not powerful enough to challenge the chancellor directly. The council voted. The majority decided to wait. They would not contact Earth. They would solve these problems themselves. On a colony world called New Harvest, people were starting to panic. The orbital habitat that housed 3 million residents was having environmental control problems. The temperature kept fluctuating wildly. Yesterday it had been too hot. Today it was too cold. The air recyclers were making strange noises. The colony administrator, a Palaxian named Quelnix, had called in every engineer he could find. None of them could figure out what was wrong. The habitat had been built by humans 70 years ago. It had always worked perfectly. Did the humans leave any maintenance records? One engineer asked. Quelnix searched the computer systems. He found folders full of documents, diagrams, and schedules. But they were all written in human technical language, full of terms and abbreviations that nobody understood. "We need a human engineer," Quelnix said. "There are no human engineers," his assistant replied. They all went home. That night, the temperature in the habitat dropped to near freezing. People huddled in their homes, wearing every piece of clothing they owned. Children cried. The elderly got sick. Quelnix sent an emergency message to the council. They replied that help was on the way, but the help never came. Back on Earth, Young-Soo saw a news report about new harvest. He recognized the habitat immediately. He had helped maintain it for 3 years. He knew exactly what was wrong. It was a simple fix, really. Just a few lines of code in the climate control system. He could fix it in 20 minutes if he was there. But he was not there. He was on Earth in his garden growing vegetables. His wife came outside and stood beside him. "You want to help them," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Young-Soo admitted, "but I cannot." The order was clear. "No contact. No assistance. Why?" his wife asked. "I do not understand why we left." Young-Soo thought about how to explain it. "Imagine you work very hard at a job. You do your best every day. You fix problems. You save lives. You keep everything running smoothly. But your boss never thanks you. Your coworkers make fun of you. They call you weak for caring about safety. They ignore your advice, and when something goes wrong, they blame you." His wife nodded slowly. "How long would you stay at that job?" "Exactly," Young-Soo said. He went inside and turned off the news. He did not want to watch anymore. He knew things were going to get much worse before they got better. In the council chambers, Vrextal sat alone long after the other delegates had gone home. He was looking at reports, trying to calculate how bad the situation might become. The numbers were terrifying. If current trends continued, the galactic economy would contract by 30% within 6 months. Food shortages would affect at least 200 colonies. Disease outbreaks would kill hundreds of millions, and the border war between his people and the Kothrans was getting worse without human peacekeepers to mediate. Just today, both sides had destroyed each other's space stations. Thousands were dead. Vrextal pulled up old council session recordings. He watched himself and his colleagues dismiss human concerns, laugh at human caution, demand human help while offering nothing in return. 8 months after the humans left, former security chief Dong Hyun sat on his porch watching the sunset. His farm was in the countryside, far from any cities. The only sounds were birds singing and wind moving through the wheat fields. It was peaceful. He had not felt this peaceful in 30 years. His tablet was on the table beside him, but he had turned off all notifications. He did not want to see the news anymore, but his daughter had called earlier and told him he should watch, so reluctantly he picked up the tablet and opened the news feed. The main story made his chest tighten. The border war between the Vrelian Empire and the Kothran Federation had escalated beyond anyone's worst predictions. 3 entire star systems had been destroyed. Not just damaged or conquered, destroyed. Both sides had used weapons that were banned by every galactic treaty. The Vrelians had deployed solar bombs that destabilized stars. The Kothrans had responded with biological weapons that made planets uninhabitable for centuries. Billions of civilians had died. Billions more were refugees with nowhere to go. Dong Hyun had predicted this exact scenario 5 years ago. He had written a detailed report explaining how the border dispute would escalate without proper peacekeeping. He had presented it to the council. They had thanked him politely and done nothing. Now those star systems were graveyards, debris fields where civilizations used to be. The news showed refugee ships floating in space, running out of fuel and supplies. They were trying to reach the orbital habitats that humans had built for exactly this kind of emergency, but most of those habitats were no longer functioning properly. Environmental systems were failing. Power generators were breaking down. Food production had stopped. Dong Hyun watched a mother holding her child on one of those ships. The child was crying. The mother looked exhausted and hopeless. He turned off the tablet. In the council chambers, Chancellor Vrextal was trying to maintain order. but it was becoming impossible. 7 member species had withdrawn from the Council in the past month. They blamed the Council for the catastrophic failures happening everywhere. "You promised us stability," the Palaxian ambassador shouted. "You promised us prosperity. Instead, our trade routes are failing. Our colonies are starving, and war is consuming entire sectors." Other delegates joined the shouting. The chamber was chaos. Vrextal, who had been a counselor for 40 years, had never seen anything like this. The Vrelian chancellor tried to restore order by slamming his desk. "Silence! We will resolve these issues. How?" demanded a small delegate from a minor species that usually stayed quiet. "How will you resolve anything? You do not know how to maintain the hyperspace gates. You cannot control the plagues. You cannot feed the refugees. You cannot stop the wars. The humans did all of that, and you treated them like servants." The chancellor's face turned dark purple with anger. "The humans abandoned their responsibilities. This is their fault." Vrextal finally spoke up. "No, this is our fault." The chamber went quiet. Everyone turned to look at him. "I have been reviewing the records," Vrextal continued. "Every problem we are facing now, the humans warned us about. Every single one. And we ignored them. We dismissed their concerns. We called them too cautious, too emotional, too primitive to understand galactic politics." He activated a holographic display. It showed clips from old council sessions. In each clip, a human representative was presenting a warning, a plan, or a proposal. And in each clip, the council dismissed them. Here, Ambassador Taeyang warns that the border dispute will escalate without peacekeepers. We ignored him and sent human forces to 14 other conflicts instead. Click. Next clip. Here, Dr. Jiwan explains that we need better epidemic response protocols. We told her that her methods were too expensive. Click. Next clip. Here, Engineer Youngsu requests funding to upgrade the Nexus gate systems. We denied his request because we thought the old systems were good enough. Click, click, click. The clips went on and on. Years and years of humans trying to help, trying to warn, trying to improve things. And years of the council saying no. "They did not abandon us," Vrextal said quietly. "We drove them away." The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the chancellor stood up and left without a word. Several other delegates followed him, but many stayed. And for the first time, they began to seriously discuss what needed to be done. On Earth, in a small apartment in Seoul, retired Admiral Kyung-suk was having tea with 3 alien visitors. They had arrived yesterday, claiming to represent a coalition of council members who wanted to negotiate with humanity. The 3 aliens looked uncomfortable sitting on her floor cushions. One was Vrelian, one was Palaxian, and one was from a species called the Mrenthi. They had introduced themselves very formally and apologized for arriving without an appointment. Kyung-suk poured tea for each of them and smiled pleasantly. She was 78 years old and had been retired for 6 years. She was also one of the most respected military leaders in human history. "We need your help," the Vrelian delegate said. "The galaxy is collapsing. Billions are dying. Please, will humanity return to the council?" Kyung-suk sipped her tea. "Why should we?" The question seemed to surprise them. They looked at each other uncertainly. Because people are suffering," the Palaxian delegate said. "People were suffering before we left," Kyung-suk replied calmly. "People were suffering in the border wars that you kept starting. People were suffering in the refugee camps that you underfunded. People were suffering from diseases that you did not prevent. We tried to help. You stopped us." She picked up a remote control and activated her wall screen. It showed archived footage of council sessions, similar to what Vrextal had shown. But Kyung-suk had compiled hundreds of hours of footage. "Watch," she said. The aliens watched as humans presented careful plans, detailed studies, and urgent warnings. They watched as council members interrupted, dismissed, mocked, and ignored those humans. They watched as human ambassadors remained calm and professional, despite being treated with open disrespect. "This one is my favorite," Kyung-suk said, pointing to a clip. It showed a young human doctor trying to explain epidemic prevention protocols. A Vrelian counselor had interrupted her to say that humans were too paranoid about disease and should stop wasting the council's time. "That doctor is Jiwan," Kyung-suk said. "She saved 43 million lives during her career, including, if I remember correctly, the Vrelian chancellor's own daughter during the Crimson Fever outbreak 20 years ago." The Vrelian delegate looked down at his tea. Kyung-suk showed them clip after clip. Hours of footage, By the end, all three aliens looked ashamed. "We did not realize," the Merenthi delegate whispered. "That is the problem," Kyung-suk said. "You did not realize. You never asked yourselves why humans were willing to do all the hard, dangerous, thankless work that nobody else wanted to do. You just took it for granted." "What do you want from us?" the Palaxian asked. "An apology? Reparations? Better treatment? Tell us what it will take for humanity to return." Kyung-suk refilled their teacups. "I cannot tell you that. I am retired. I do not make decisions for humanity anymore. But I can tell you what I think." She leaned forward. "I think you need to understand something fundamental about humans. We do not help people because we expect rewards. We do not maintain your infrastructure because we want power. We do not fight your wars because we enjoy fighting. We do these things because we believe that civilized beings should help each other." "Then why did you leave?" the Vrelian asked. "Because you made it impossible for us to help effectively," Kyung-suk said. "Every plan we made, you changed. Every protocol we established, you ignored. Every warning we gave, you dismissed. You did not want partners. You wanted servants. And we are not servants." She stood up, indicating that the meeting was over. "The council knows where to find us. When you are ready to listen, truly listen, then maybe we can talk again." The three aliens stood and bowed respectfully. They left quietly. Kyung-suk watched them go, then looked out her window at the city lights. She wondered if the council would learn in time. She hoped so, for the sake of all those refugees floating in space, all those people dying from diseases that could be cured, all those colonies slowly failing. But hope was not enough. The council needed to change fundamentally, and change was hard, especially for proud civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. Meanwhile, the death toll kept rising. The galactic economy kept contracting. More colonies went silent, their distress signals unanswered. More ships got lost in hyperspace due to failing navigation systems. More habitats became uninhabitable. 42 colonies had now gone completely dark. Nobody knew if the people there were alive or dead. Search and rescue operations could not reach them because the hyperspace routes were too unstable. The total death toll had reached 14 billion. 14 billion lives lost in 8 months. And still, the majority of the council refused to formally apologize or negotiate with Earth. Dong-hyun saw all of this on his tablet and felt sick. He had been a soldier for 40 years. He had dedicated his life to protecting people. Watching them die while he sat safely on his farm was torture. But he understood why the decision had been made. Sometimes walking away was the only way to make people understand what they were losing. 14 months after humanity left the Galactic Council, Chancellor Vrextal sat in his office staring at a pile of reports that represented the complete collapse of galactic civilization. His hands were shaking. He had not slept properly in weeks. The reports were horrifying. The death toll had now reached 14 billion. 14 billion lives lost because the council had been too proud, too arrogant, too foolish to appreciate what they had. Vrextal had spent the last month going through archives, reading every human proposal that had been rejected, every warning that had been ignored, every plan that had been dismissed. The weight of those failures was crushing him. He had found a proposal from 30 years ago written by a human engineer named Dong-hyun. The proposal outlined a comprehensive peacekeeping system that would have prevented most of the wars currently destroying the galaxy. The cost would have been minimal. The council had rejected it as unnecessary interference in member state affairs. He had found a medical protocol designed by Dr. Ji-won that would have contained every plague outbreak within days. The council had rejected it as too expensive and too paranoid. He had found an infrastructure maintenance plan that would have kept all the hyperspace gates, orbital habitats, and life support systems running indefinitely. The council had rejected it as over-engineered by anxious humans. Every disaster currently happening could have been prevented. Every life lost could have been saved. And all it would have cost was the council's willingness to listen. Vrextal had called for an emergency session. Every remaining council member was present. The chamber felt empty with only 43 species represented instead of the usual 100. "We need to vote on a formal apology to humanity," Vrextal said without preamble. "We need to beg them to return. We need to accept whatever conditions they demand." For once, nobody argued. The disaster was too obvious, too overwhelming. Even the proud Vrelian chancellor who had once led the opposition stayed silent. The vote was unanimous. The council would draft a formal apology and plea for humanity's return. Rextal was assigned to lead the drafting committee. He spent 3 days writing and rewriting the document. Every word had to be perfect. This was possibly the most important document in galactic history. But before the apology could be sent, something happened that nobody expected. Human ships appeared across the galaxy. Not at council worlds. Not at government centers, at refugee camps, at dying colonies, at orbital habitats full of starving people. Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of his ship, looking at the massive refugee flotilla drifting in space ahead of them. According to his sensors, there were over 500 ships out there, holding more than 2 million beings. Most of the ships were running on emergency power. Some had already gone dark. All medical teams prepare for mass casualty response, Hyunwoo ordered. Engineering teams, I want those ships stabilized within 6 hours. Supply teams, start distributing food, water, and medicine immediately. His crew moved with practiced efficiency. They had done this kind of operation hundreds of times before. They were good at it. Within an hour, human medical teams were boarding the refugee ships. They found terrible conditions. People packed together so tightly they could barely move. Children crying from hunger. The elderly dying from treatable diseases. The air was foul, and the water recyclers had failed days ago. Dr. Jiwon worked on one of the ships for 40 straight hours. She treated infections, set broken bones, delivered babies, and held the hands of people who were dying. Her medical team worked alongside her, never complaining, never stopping. On another ship, a young medic named Haewon found a Vrelian child who was barely breathing. The child had the same respiratory disease that was currently ravaging the Kothron homeworld. Haewon knew this disease. She had the vaccine in her medical kit. She injected the child, monitored her vital signs, and stayed with her until she stabilized. The child's mother sobbed and tried to thank her in broken human language. Haewon just smiled and moved on to the next patient. Meanwhile, engineer Young-soo and his team were working on restoring the failing orbital habitat above the colony world of New Harvest. They had brought new parts and updated software. Within 3 days, the habitat was running better than it had in years. Young-soo left detailed instructions and trained the local staff properly this time. He made sure they understood every system, every backup protocol, every warning sign. All across the galaxy, humans were appearing wherever people needed help. They did not announce themselves. They did not demand recognition. They just came, helped, and often left before anyone could properly thank them. But they refused all contact with council officials. When government representatives tried to approach them, human captains politely but firmly declined to speak with them. Chancellor Vrextal heard about the human relief efforts and felt a mix of emotions. Relief that people were being saved. Shame that humanity was helping, despite how badly they had been treated, and confusion about why they were refusing to talk to the council. He decided to go see for himself. Against the advice of his security team, he took a small shuttle to the refugee camp that was currently being supported by human forces. The camp was enormous, stretching across 3 moons. Millions of refugees from the destroyed star systems were living in temporary shelters. When Vrextal had last seen this camp 2 months ago, it had been a disaster. People were dying by the thousands every day. The smell of death had been overwhelming. Now the camp was transformed. Clean water was flowing. Food was being distributed in an orderly fashion. Medical tents were treating the sick and injured. Children were even playing in designated safe areas, and everywhere Vrextal saw humans working. They moved with calm efficiency, solving problems, helping people, never stopping to rest. He found Dr. Jiwon in one of the medical tents. She had just finished treating a patient and was making notes on her tablet. She looked exhausted. Her hair was tied back messily, and her clothes were stained with various bodily fluids. Dr. Jiwon, Vrextal said quietly, "May I speak with you?" She looked up and seemed to recognize him. For a moment, he thought she would refuse, but then she nodded and gestured to a quiet corner of the tent. "I wanted to thank you," Vrextal said. "On behalf of the council, on behalf of my people, thank you for coming back." "We did not come back," Jiwon said firmly. "We never left the people who needed us. We just stopped working with a government that did not value our contributions." "I understand," Vrextal said, "and you are right. The council treated humanity terribly. We took you for granted. We ignored your expertise. We dismissed your warnings. and now millions have died because of our arrogance. Jiwon looked at him with tired eyes. Do you really understand? Because I have been trying to explain these things for 15 years and nobody would listen. I am listening now, Rextal said. Please tell me. So she did. For 2 hours while she continued to work on patients, Jiwon explained everything. She explained how frustrating it had been to watch preventable disasters happen because the council refused to fund proper preparations. She explained how painful it was to work herself to exhaustion while council members called her efforts adequate. She explained how many times human proposals had been rejected for no good reason except pride. We did not leave because we stopped caring, Jiwon finally said. We left because you made it impossible to help. Every plan we made, you changed. Every protocol we established, you ignored. Every time we tried to do things properly, you accused us of being too slow or too cautious. You did not want our expertise. You just wanted our labor. Rextal listened to every word. By the end, he felt sick with shame. The council is preparing a formal apology, he said. We want to invite humanity back. We want to negotiate new terms, better terms. We will listen this time. I promise you that. Jiwon looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back to treating her current patient, a Kothran woman with a severe fever. That is not my decision to make, she said while checking the woman's vital signs. I am just a doctor. I go where people need medical help. What the council does is politics, and I do not do politics. Then who should I talk to? Rextal asked. Talk to Ambassador Tae-yang, Jiwon said. If he is willing to listen, which I doubt. You spent 20 years ignoring him. Why should he give you his time now? Rextal had no answer to that. He left the medical tent and walked through the refugee camp. Everywhere he looked, he saw humans working. A human engineer was fixing a water purifier. A human teacher was organizing classes for refugee children. A human security officer was resolving a dispute between two families. These were not soldiers following orders. These were people who genuinely cared about helping others. They had come back to this mess not because anyone forced them, but because it was the right thing to do. And the council had treated them like disposable tools. Rextal returned to his shuttle and sent a message to Earth. He requested a meeting with Ambassador Tae-yang. He did not expect a response. To his surprise, he got one the next day. Tae-yang would meet with him, but not on Earth and not in any official capacity. They would meet at the refugee camp and Rextal would come alone. 3 days later, Rextal stood in the camp's administrative center across from Ambassador Tae-yang. The human looked older than Rextal remembered. 2 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council. Ambassador Tae-yang stood in what used to be the council chamber and barely recognized it. The grand crystal walls were the same, but everything else had changed. The old circular arrangement of seats was gone. Instead, tables were arranged in a more equal pattern. No species had a higher position than others. No one sat on elevated platforms looking down at everyone else. It was simpler, more humble, and somehow more honest. This was no longer the Galactic Council. That institution had been dissolved 8 months ago, after 47 member species voted to completely restructure galactic governance. The new organization was called the Cooperative Assembly, and it operated on very different principles. Tae-yang had spent the past 18 months in difficult negotiations. The talks had been painful for everyone involved. Humans had demands, and they were not backing down this time. The alien species had pride, but they also had billions of suffering citizens who desperately needed help. Slowly, carefully, they had built something new. Counselor Rextal approached Tae-yang and bowed respectfully. Rextal looked older too. The stress of the past 2 years had aged everyone. Ambassador, the delegates are ready to sign the treaty, Rextal said. Are you ready? Tae-yang nodded. Yes, I think we finally got it right. They walked to the central table where the treaty documents were displayed. Every species that wanted to join the Cooperative Assembly had to agree to these terms. Many had already signed. A few were still considering. Some had refused and chosen to remain independent. The treaty was long and detailed, but it had a few core principles that changed everything. First, there would be mandatory listening periods before any military action. No more rushing into wars. Every conflict would require 30 days of mediation attempts before any weapons could be deployed, and humans would lead those mediation efforts. Second, humans would have final authority over all infrastructure and medical systems, not because humans were superior, but because they had proven they were willing to do the work properly. Other species could certainly train and work in these fields, but the protocols and standards would be set by human experts. Third, every major decision would be tested against long-term consequences. A special body called the Council of Consequence had been created. Its job was to ask the difficult questions. What happens if this plan fails? Who will be hurt? What are we not considering? Half of this council's members were human, because humans seem to be naturally good at worrying about consequences. Fourth, all species had equal representation, including those that had been considered minor before. The old hierarchy was gone. Every voice mattered. The signing ceremony took 3 hours. One by one, representatives from 70 species came forward and added their marks to the treaty. Some signed with hands, some with tentacles, some with energy signatures. Each one made a brief statement. The Palaxian representative spoke about how trade routes were finally stable again, thanks to human engineers who had rebuilt and upgraded the entire Nexus Gate network. The Kothran representative spoke about the plague that had killed 23 million of her people before human medical teams finally contained it. She wept as she thanked Dr. Jiwan by name, a representative from the Merenthi species, which had lost 2 entire colony worlds to the war, spoke about how human peacekeepers had negotiated a lasting peace between the Vrelian Empire and the Kothran Federation. The peace had held for 11 months now, the longest period without fighting in 15 years. When it was the Vrelian Chancellor's turn, he did something that shocked everyone. He knelt before the human delegation. "On behalf of my people," he said, his voice breaking, "I apologize for our arrogance. I apologize for the disrespect we showed you. I apologize for the lives lost because we refused to listen. The Vrelian Empire has a phrase, 'Pride before wisdom leads to emptiness.' We learned the truth of that phrase at a terrible cost." He stood and signed the treaty with a shaking hand. But not everyone was happy with the changes. Some species felt the treaty gave humans too much power. Some thought the new regulations were too restrictive. There were protests outside the assembly building. Taeyang understood their concerns. Power was dangerous even when given to people with good intentions. That was why the treaty included strict oversight provisions and term limits. Humans would have authority, but they would also be held accountable. After the ceremony, Taeyang walked through the corridors of the assembly building with Captain Hyunwoo and Dr. Jiwon. All 3 of them looked tired but satisfied. "Do you think it will work?" Hyunwoo asked. "I do not know," Taeyang admitted, "but it is better than what we had before, and if it starts to fail, we will fix it. That is what we do." Jiwon smiled slightly. "I just want to go back to saving lives without having to fight bureaucracy every step of the way." "You will still have to fight bureaucracy," Taeyang said, "but hopefully less of it, and the bureaucrats will actually listen now." Over the next 6 months, the galaxy slowly healed. It was not easy and it was not fast, but progress was being made. Trade routes reopened as the Nexus gates were properly maintained again. Engineer Young-Soo led a team that trained thousands of alien engineers in proper maintenance protocols. This time, people actually paid attention and followed the procedures. Agricultural production increased as human farming experts helped colonies restore their food systems. This time, when humans suggested improvements, people listened and implemented them. The refugee camps were gradually emptied as people were relocated to new homes. Some returned to their original worlds, which were slowly being cleaned and rebuilt. Others chose to start fresh on new colony worlds. The death toll from the crisis had reached 18 billion before things stabilized. 18 billion lives lost because of pride, arrogance, and the refusal to value the work that kept civilization running. Counselor Vrextal spent his remaining years teaching at a prestigious academy. His students were young beings from dozens of species who wanted to understand galactic history. He always started his courses with the same lesson, which he called the silent years. He would show them footage of the old council dismissing human concerns. He would show them the disaster that followed. And he would end every lesson with the same question: what is the cost of arrogance? His students learned to value expertise over pride. They learned to listen to warnings even when those warnings were inconvenient. They learned that the people doing the hard, unglamorous work of maintaining civilization were the most important people in any society. On Earth, Ambassador Taeyang retired for the 2nd time. He was 78 years old now, and he had earned his rest. He spent his days in his garden, growing flowers and vegetables. Sometimes young diplomats would visit him for advice. He always told them the same thing: listen more than you speak, value actions over words, and never forget that civilization is fragile. It requires constant work to maintain. Never take that work for granted. Dr. Jiwon continued working until she was 82. She trained hundreds of alien doctors in human medical techniques. She wrote textbooks that became standard reading in medical schools across the galaxy, and she saved countless more lives. When she finally retired, the Cooperative Assembly held a ceremony in her honor. Representatives from 40 species came to thank her personally. She accepted their thanks gracefully, but insisted that she had just been doing her job. Captain Hyun-woo rose to become the head of the Cooperative Assembly's peacekeeping forces. Under his leadership, the number of wars dropped by 73% over 10 years. He proved that most conflicts could be prevented with early intervention and genuine mediation. Engineer Young-soo never went back to space. He stayed on his farm, growing vegetables and teaching maintenance protocols through video calls. Young engineers from across the galaxy would contact him with questions, and he always answered patiently. As the years passed, a new generation grew up in the reformed galaxy. They learned about the old council and the silent years in their history classes. Many found it hard to believe that civilizations could be so foolish. A young human woman named Min Seo graduated from engineering school and got her first assignment, working on a Nexus gate station with a team of alien engineers. She was nervous her first day, worried that she might face the same disrespect that older humans had experienced. But her Kothran colleague greeted her warmly and asked her opinion on a maintenance issue. When she suggested a solution, he listened carefully and implemented it immediately. "Thank you," he said. "That is much better than my original plan. Humans always think things through so carefully." Min Seo smiled. This was what the older generation had fought for. A galaxy where expertise was respected, where different perspectives were valued, where people actually listened to each other. It was not perfect. There were still conflicts, still disagreements, still problems to solve. But now those problems were faced together, with mutual respect and genuine cooperation. The Cooperative Assembly met every month to discuss galactic affairs. Ambassador Tae Yang's replacement, a skilled diplomat named Jae Hyun, often found himself mediating disputes between species. But unlike the old council, people actually listened when he spoke. His words had weight because humanity,